Thank you for joining us on our series of summer webinars here. This current webinar is E911 for campus-only environments. There's a lot of talk about E911, and we just wanted to make sure that people are aware that it may be possible that you think, hey, I'm on a campus, I don't need E911, but there may be certain situations that could arise where E911 is still something that you should address. I also have Mike Anderson here with me, our National Sales Director, and I'm going to be turning over the webinar to him in just a few minutes, just a few seconds actually. But I did want to just tell you a little bit about 911 Emergency Telecom. We were founded in 1997 to provide E911 services for organizations utilizing a multi-line telephone system. We currently have clients in about 48 states and in Canada. We meet all the legislation requirements, and we're easily scalable. We're a fully hosted E911 solution. 911 ETC only does enhanced 911. There is nothing else that 911 ETC does. We just try to make sure that people are protected when somebody dials 911. We want to make sure that the 911 operator receives the correct location information of where that call is coming from. With that being said, I also wanted to make sure everybody knows that there is a question bar on the side of the webinar. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in. Throughout the webinar, if something pops up that seems pertinent to the conversation, I will ask Mike Anderson. And then at the end, we'll kind of wrap it up with all the different questions that people might have. All righty? So, Mike.
Thanks, Kevin. So basically, there are three things that you should really consider when implementing E911. The first is obviously providing the correct location information. If you have a campus that has multiple addresses, generally the way 911 works is that your dial tone provider will provide one location in the database, so everything will default back to the main billing address. So if you have multiple addresses within your campus, that becomes a problem. Obviously as well, if you have multi-story buildings or a very large manufacturing facility, those are something to take into account as well. Would someone find, if someone dialed 911 and they collapsed, would they find that person in a timely manner? Another thing to consider is, as I mentioned, is the caller location as opposed to the billing location. So that would require what we call a PS Alley account. And this is something, a customer can do themselves if they have, just everything in one geographic area. They can establish what we call PS Alley, which stands for Private Switch Automatic Location Identification. And that allows you to go into the 911 database and identify each phone number to a location, or what we call an ELAN, which is basically just a phone number that correlates to a zone within the building. It might be per floor, or it might be northwest quadrant, whatever that may be. But obviously, if you have a multi-story building, those should be at least one zone per floor. The next thing is just making sure that you have an effective plan internally. Some people get notifications internally from their PBX or some other kind of adjunct equipment that gives you a notification to your security personnel. But basically, going in and making sure you have a plan that makes sense for you internally. And a lot of times that it entails maybe reaching out to the PSAP or the local 911 operator and finding out what they want to see in the event that someone dials 911 from your campus. Next slide. Over the years, and I've been doing this 13 years, there have been different reasons for people implementing E911. I always just say it's just the right thing to do. Protect your most important asset, which are your people. Before even any 911 legislation is required, there are companies out there being proactive in making sure that their employees are safe. As I mentioned, there are legal requirements now in 18 states. Unfortunately, none of the laws are not uniform across the United States. They're different in each region or each state. In some cases, it's 7,000 square feet. It might be 25,000 square feet or 40,000 square feet to where you have to dial down to that granular of a level. So, for instance, I'm in Washington State. They require 25,000 square feet or per floor. So if you had a building that had a floor that was 30,000 square feet, you would need to break that up into north, south, or east, west, or whatever that might be. And then lastly, it's just from a risk management perspective, even though there's no legislation requiring E911, like I said, a lot of companies are being proactive in ensuring that if someone dials 911, that they're going to find that person in a timely fashion. Another thing to think about, a lot of initial customers come to me and say, hey, we want to implement E911 in Illinois or Minnesota because that's where there's legislation. But they also have locations in states that do not require it. But I find that once they go back to legal and let them know what they're doing, legal a lot of times comes back and says, well, if we address it in Illinois or Minnesota, we need to address it in other states as well because now we're aware of the issue, and just because there's no law requiring it doesn't mean we're not still liable in the event that something does happen. The next slide just shows the states with the current E911 legislation. The ones in red are the ones that currently have something in place. The ones in light blue, there's nothing. And in the dark blue, there is pending legislation. If you want to get more information about this, you can go to our website at www.911etc.com. On the front page is the legislation page. You just click on it, and up will come the states, and you can actually pull up the exact legislation for each individual state if you need more information or you'd like to bring that to legal to show them, and let them interpret what you should do as an organization. The next slide, unfortunately, talks about a couple recent tragedies, basically, one in Texas, one in Utah, where not necessarily E911, the first one, which is basically where a lady had her family in a hotel, and her estranged husband came to visit them, or visit the children, and the estranged husband started attacking the wife, and the daughter dialed 911 from the hotel phone. And unfortunately, this hotel programmed their PBX to where you had to dial 911. So she dialed 911 multiple times and could not get out to 911, and unfortunately, her mother perished, and as a quite a tragedy that could have been avoided. So that's something that that we're trying to get the information out there to people. I know the hospitality industry is probably aware of this, just about everybody now, but you should be able to get out dialing 911, 911, or any variation of that, because people in a panic, or children on campus, or someone's visiting you and they don't know what your policies and procedures are to get out an outside line. They could avoid a tragedy. The next one is a gentleman was in a parts store in Midvale, Utah. He dialed 911, and they were a remote site off of they basically hung some IP phones off the core PBX, which was actually, I think, in Salt Lake City. And the 911 operators, even though the people were telling them where they were located, they always go by what's on their screen. And what was on their screen was a different address, and that's where they responded. So it basically delayed 30 minutes, and the man ended up perishing because of this. So, you start hanging IP phones out, off of a core, that presents a big challenge. But it could certainly happen, in a campus environment as well. If you have multiple addresses or multiple buildings, they dial 911 and they collapse and they can't speak any longer, they're going to show up to what's on their screen, which is the main billing address generally. The next screen is just basically just talks about how this has gotten a lot of visibility within the FCC recently, and they are definitely looking to address this issue. I've heard this before, so I'm not going to hold my breath, but I know that the FCC is really looking at this hard, and hopefully one day we'll have some kind of uniform E911 legislation federally rather than doing it piecemeal by state from state, because like I said, the states are all, the legislation is all a little bit different depending on where you're at. So if you have a multi-line telephone system but a single campus, do you really need to worry about E911? And I think, the answer is obviously yes. If you have a campus environment where it's a, 3,000 square foot building, one story, then no. I mean, because you dial 911, you're going to show up at that location, and they'll find them in a timely manner. But like I said, when you have multiple floors, multiple buildings, or multiple addresses, that's when you need to worry about E911. As I mentioned earlier, some of the questions to consider, is an access code required to get an outside line, like 911? Is your current system configured to push out the location information that's granular enough? Meaning, have you established a PS Alley account and put in, actual location information for each of your phone numbers or for each of your ELANs, or, at least getting to a zone area? Are you giving on-site notification to your internal people so they can respond accordingly and maybe direct emergency personnel when they arrive? Have you talked to your local PSAP, basically the 911 operators, and see what they would like to see? Those are kind of questions to consider and think about. But most importantly, it's really just common sense. Think about it. If you were to dial 911 and you could not speak, how quickly would they get to where you're located? I mean, that's the true central question. And if it's 10, 15 minutes, that's not good enough. Or, in some cases, they show up, they can't find you at all because they have no idea, which has happened before. In fact, I won't get into it too much, but there was a story of a gentleman in Maryland who dialed 911, and they were in a little campus, in a little office park, and they had a couple buildings, and they didn't find him till, and he called early in the morning, they didn't find him till the cleaning folks came in later that evening, came in to clean his office, and he was laying underneath his desk, apparently dead. So, and the access code, as I mentioned earlier with the Carey's Law and in the hotel situation, this is an easily fixed issue in terms of, getting out with 911 or 911. Most PBXs, newer PBXs at least, can be easily configured to directly dial 911, and that should not really cost hardly anything to get that accomplished and make sure that is no longer an issue. I know for quite some time that's something we've been talking about, and everyone thought it was, it's not a big deal, but obviously something did happen because someone used an access 9 to get out rather than just 911. Secondly, have you established PS Alley? Are you getting more than just the main billing address? I mean, the only way to get other than the main billing address is to establish what we call PS Alley, or you can work with a provider like 911 ETC or our competitors that can provide a similar kind of 911 database or routing service. And then, just so everybody understands how this would work if you did establish what we call PS Alley, or using a service provider such as 911 ETC, is that you would take your phone numbers and your locations, and you would load it into what we call the PS Alley database. Once you do that, your 911 or your dial tone provider will go into the central office and then allow each DID or what we call an ELAN to pass through to the 911 operator, because right now they're just inserting their main billing telephone number and delivering that to the 911 operator because they only have the main billing address in the database. They just give you one record in that 911 database. Once you establish PS Alley, you can go into the 911 database and attach location information to each phone number or to a phone number you've assigned to a zone or a location. And that way, when someone dials 911, they will get at least, the building, floor, northwest quadrant, whatever it might be, whatever makes sense in your particular environment. I know that we have a lot of manufacturing customers where they have very large, manufacturing warehouses, and we basically have put in what we call zones, but we do it by, they actually label and put in like color coordinated zones like on the floor. So it's like like zone 6 orange, and they've actually put in orange paint on the floor to designate that's the area, because it was so hard. If they were to try to do it northwest, southwest, it was still going to be too large of a zone to find that particular person. So they've actually broken it up even more granular than that. So it's really what makes sense and for your particular environment. And you guys, you as a customer know your environment better than anybody. But it's also good to go to the PSAP and see what they would like to see as well. And generally, they're very easy to work with, and because they know that you're trying to help them do their job better as well. And number 3 basically is to test your 911 solution. Make those calls to 911. See what information they get. In some cases, you have to schedule a time to test. Like in New York City, they make you do it in the middle of the night. Other places, you just call the PSAP on their administrative line and ask if it's okay to make some test calls. In most cases, they have no problem with it because, like I said, they know that you're trying to make their job easier in the event someone dials 911. Number 4, on-site notification to me is very important just because, if someone internally gets that notification there's been a 911 call and they know where they're located, they can be waiting at the front door to assist the emergency personnel when they arrive, and you can escort them to that emergency right away. To me, it's very valuable to have that. Obviously, in some cases where there's no security, that doesn't help. But if it's a campus environment, generally you have a front desk person or somebody that knows your layout and can be waiting to assist emergency personnel when they arrive. This just shows you an example of what kind of on-site notification, but there's many companies that provide, some kind of on-site notification with adjunct or software. But you can send SMS, email alerts, screen pops to computers. You can tie in IP cameras. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you can add to your on-site notification above and beyond what the PBX inherent capabilities are, which is generally just sending an extension and maybe a name. But there are ways to enhance your on-site notification. And really, that's just about it. This was just going to be a quick and easy talking about E911 in the campus, because I do find customers that say, well, we just have a small campus, we're okay. But people don't realize if you have multiple floors, multiple buildings, multiple addresses within that campus, if that person cannot speak when they dial 911, they're going to have a problem finding that person. So we just want to make sure that the visibility is out there and people are aware that this issue still does arrive. Because a lot of times customers will come to me, hey, we're opening a remote location off the core PBX, and now we need E911. But really, in your campus, you really need E911 as well. It's not the remote sites. If you have, like I said, multiple floors, multiple addresses, multiple buildings, that presents a challenge to the 911 dispatch personnel, because if you can't speak, they probably won't be able to find you in a timely manner. So that's about it. Kevin, are there any questions that come up?
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the little chat bar on the side, and I'll make sure we lob them over to Mike. Okay, there is one question here. I have a 2-story building in Chicago, and both floors combined are less than 40,000 square feet. Am I required to have E911?
Well, I'm not an attorney, so I don't pretend to be one. But from my understanding, it has to be per floor. Or so if you had one floor that was under 40,000 square feet, you'd be fine. But from my understanding, at least from some of my customers' understanding, is it needs to at least be broken out by floor as well. But if you have in-house legal, I would run that by them, because, like I said, I'm not an attorney.
Okay. There's another question here. I have a campus environment with 4 buildings, and they all have one address. How would I get the information into the E911 database per building? Great question.
No, that's a great question. We have similar customers in that same scenario. Basically, signage. What our customers have done in that scenario, they've actually assigned like building A, building B, and they've actually put signage out front saying this is building A, B, C, and D. So once you load into the 911 database, you can put in the address, and then obviously you have 4 buildings. So then you would put building A, floor 2, or building B, or building 1, or whatever you want to call it. But that's the way all the customers that we have done it, with just one address and multiple buildings. And that can be done very inexpensively generally. I mean, you set up a PSLA account, you go in and assign maybe one ELIN or phone number to each building. I don't know the size of those buildings, but let's just say they're 1-story buildings. You could assign one phone number to it, load it into the 911 database, and you really wouldn't have to update anything, just depending on your PBX and its capabilities. But you could basically assign a phone number to each building. So anybody logs in or plugs in a phone at that building and dials 911, it's going to send out the phone number that correlates to that particular building, which you've already loaded that phone number and location in the 911 database. I hope that answered your question. Any other questions, Kevin?
Yeah, here we go. Where do you go to sign up to test addresses and formats?
So you would go online, look up the local PSAP in your county, and there's an administrative line, or you go to the county website and look up your public safety answer points, and you call the administrative line. Don't dial 911 to ask them. They don't like that. But generally, there's an administrative line. You can look up on the county website and call the PSAP operator, or the PSAP manager, whoever it might be, and tell them what you're trying to accomplish and ask if there's a need to schedule it, and they'll tell you whether yes or no. Generally, in more rural areas, you don't need to schedule, but in busy cities like New York or Boston, you generally need to schedule a time to do some testing with them.
Okay. There's one other question here. I recently moved to SIP for call delivery and cannot get my caller ID to get to the PSAP anymore. How can I fix this?
Yeah, that has to do with your SIP provider. There are solutions out there that can rectify that issue. I would first go to my SIP provider and explain what the problem is, but they should be working with a company like us or our competitors. We have the ability then to get that caller ID or the ANI into the appropriate PSAP. So I would first go to my SIP provider. That's really their responsibility, and they should be using a service like us or one of our competitors that can get that information in there. And if the SIP provider will not do that for you, then you can certainly reach out to us and we can rectify that problem, but they should be addressing that.
Okay, let's see if there's any other questions here. Okay, I have a couple of at-home workers, and I block 911 calls. Is that legally allowed?
No. Like I said, I'm not an attorney, but from my understanding is you do not want to ever block 911. I do know some companies who've had people sign waivers saying that they will not dial 911. They should use their home phone. And that apparently was fine with their legal, and it was a pretty large company. So, but each company is different. We have other customers that are actually covering their remote workers, and it can be done quite inexpensively as well. Using a company like us or one of our competitors, we can all address the remote workers, but you generally do not want to ever block 911 unless maybe you have them sign a waiver or have some way to cover your rear. I would not suggest ever doing that.
And Mike, I actually wanted to piggyback onto that. I have this story that I always tell about my nephew, who's actually just graduated from high school now, but when he was 3 years old, he was trained to dial 911 because my older sister's diabetic. And one morning, my older sister didn't wake up, and she was having a reaction, and he went over to the phone, grabbed it, and dialed 911. And I just can imagine if we told him, well, you can use all the other phones in the house, but don't use this one. That would have been an interesting conversation to have with him.
Yeah, there are stories that we can tell, and where it was shared with us by companies that someone else picked up the VPN phone and dialed 911. They picked up their dad's phone because he collapsed because the child was not aware. It was a soft. Well, generally it wouldn't be a soft phone, but it generally was. It's always been a VPN hard phone at their home. I've heard some horror stories about that. So.
Alrighty, and I think that may be it for questions. Oh, there's one more question here. Can we get a recording of the webinar? Yes, everybody who is attendance, and actually even anybody who's signed up, will be sending out a link where you can download the recording. That's it, unless there's any other questions. I think we may be good. I have both Mike's and my contact information on here, so if you had any questions or if you wanted to get maybe the best practices that we were talking about earlier, you can just email us or give us a call. In that regard, I will say thank you to Mike Anderson, our National Sales Director, and for everybody attending. Hope we all had a good time.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.